I hope that you are well and also hope that you are having a good day so far. Today we'll be doing our grade 1 English lesson on adjectives. And before we start, we're going to log on to aplusstudents.ca. Once we've logged on to aplusstudents.ca with our username as well as our password, and then we're going to select the subject of language arts, grade 1, and then we're going to scroll down up until we get to the chapter of adjectives. So today we'll be doing adjectives that compare, pictures, use numbers, and we're also going to see that adjectives, we're going to see what adjectives tells us what kind, as well as how many. All right, so when we compare pictures using adjectives, right? And then we will be able to see how it describes the noun, right? Because in adjectives, it describes a noun. So an adjective, it describes a noun. And with an adjective, when it describes a noun, it basically tells us what kind, and it also tells us how many. So when an adjective tells us what kind, then it's like saying the girl wears a red dress. And when the girl wears a red dress, then it is like the red dress, it tells us what kind of dress the girl wears. So when we wear the way, and when we, for example, an adjective that, for example, tells us how many, it's like saying the boy has 10 apples or the boy has several apples. So that basically tells us how many, right? So, for example, an adjective, so an adjective it tells us more about the noun or it tells us more about the pronoun, right? And it tells us how many and it tells us what kind. And an example is, right, if we look at an example of a few adjectives, if we look at this example, the girl wears a red dress, right? Then red tells us what kind of dress the girl wears. Because remember, we could have just said that the girl wears a dress, but instead we're saying the girl wears a red dress, right? Which means that red, it tells us what kind of dress the girl wears. Oopsie. So red tells us what kind of dress the girl wears. If we, for example, say John has 8 apples, right? If we say John has 8 apples and then eight, the word eight tells us how many apples John has, right? Because now we are describing, or we are basically telling more about the noun, right? So it's basically telling us more about the noun or the pronoun, or we can also say adjectives describe the noun, right? So adjectives, it either tells us more about the noun or the pronoun, or adjectives, they describe the noun, right? They tell us what kind and they tell us how many. So words that describe something, that is basically an adjective, right? It can be described in color, it can be described in height, it can be described in weight, it can be described literally in anything. If you, for example, are sitting in front of your laptop, and then you can maybe say that I'm sitting in front of my black laptop or my small laptop or my big laptop, right? I'm sitting in front of the big TV or the small TV, right? Or the bright TV. I'm sitting on the red couch. I'm sitting on the black couch. So that is how adjectives describes nouns, right? All right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go to we are doing our tutorial on aplusstudents.ca. So now we're going to compare pictures using adjectives. And we said an adjective, it's a word. An adjective is a word that tells you, oopsie, it's a word that tells us about a person, an animal, a place, or a thing, which means that if we say it tells us about the person, animal, place, or thing, remember those are nouns, right? So it either tells us what the person is doing, the animal is doing, you know, or the thing is doing. And like we said, some animals tell us what, and adjectives, sorry, tells us what kind. For example, if we look at this truck, right? Then we say, Tom sees a big truck. So if we describe this truck, then we can describe this truck as big. Or you can describe this truck as red and blue truck, right? So you can say Tom sees a big truck, or you can say Tom sees a red and blue truck, right? Because this one is red and it is blue. So you can basically describe the truck in color, right? We have a red bull, right? Here we have a red bull. You can even say we have a small bull, because you are basically describing it. If that is a cricket ball, then of course the ball is hard. So you can maybe say we have a hard ball, or you can say it's a soft ball, depending, right? So that is how you describe a noun or a thing, right? And you can basically say what kind. It's where we either describe something in color, in size, right? In height, in weight. All right. Like if we look at this activity, like this little activity, it says find the happy baby. Find the happy baby. What is the adjective within that sentence? How are they describing the baby? So how are they describing the baby? Guys, can we stop please? Samuel and is it Tulasi? Both of you stop please. All right. So if we say find the happy baby, then what is the adjective that describes what type of baby it is or what kind of baby it is? It says find the happy baby. And if we were to identify the adjective, then we would say happy. That basically describes the baby. Find the happy baby, meaning that the baby is happy. We could have even said that the baby is crying, right? But in this case, happy describes the baby. So, what kind of baby? It is a happy baby. So, happy tells us what kind of baby to find. Then it also says find the hard bit. Find the hard bit. What is our adjective within the sentence? And if we were to find the adjective within the sentence, right, that describes or tells us what kind of bed to find, and then we will say we need to find the hard bed, right? Because here they're describing the bed as hard, but they can even describe the bed as soft. They can describe the bed as small. They can describe the bed as big, but in this case, the bed is being described as hard. So find the hard bed. And hard is our adjective. All right, if we go into the next one, it says, this is the hard, okay, not the hard bit. Find the big animal. So find the big animal. If you were to find the big animal, how are we describing the animal? Like what kind of animal? All right. And if we were to, in the sentence, find the animal, right, and then that basically tells us what kind of animal, then we would say this is the big animal. Because we can describe this animal as big, we can describe the animal as small, as a fluffy animal, right? Furry animal, scary animal. That is how we can describe the animal, but in this case, we are describing the animal as a big animal. So find the big animal. Tulasia is saying that you don't understand adjectives. Should I explain again? All right, so I'm quickly going to just briefly describe again or explain again, and then we're going to go on to our test, okay? All right, so an adjective, right? So our chapter is adjectives. And adjectives, right, is a word that tells us more about a person, it tells us more about an animal, tells us more about the place, or it tells us more about the thing, right? So an adjective, it basically describes or tells us more about the noun. And that is why we're saying it tells us more about either a person, animal, place, or thing, right? So some of the adjectives, right? The adjectives. Some of the adjective, it tells us what kind, or some of the adjectives tells us how many, right? When an adjective tells us what kind, then we would, for example, describe either that person, we would describe the animal, describe the place, or we would describe the thing as, we would describe it, for example, either as it is big or it is small, or we would describe it in color, right? And if we were to say how many, right, then we can maybe say Tom has 10 marbles, right? So how many? That tells us how many marbles Tom has. So instead of just saying Tom has marbles, we can say Tom has 10 marbles because that tells us how many marbles Tom has, right? So now we're describing that marbles as in how many, right? As in a number. And if we were to, for example, describe something as, and we basically say what kind, then we can maybe say, for example, Tom sees a big truck. So instead of just saying Tom sees a truck, we are now describing that truck. So So now we're describing that truck. So we can either describe the truck as it being big, or you can describe the truck as in it's a red truck or a blue truck, right? That basically tells us what kind. For example, if you are, Tulasi, if you are sitting either in front of your PC, or you're sitting in front of your laptop, or you're sitting in front of the TV, right? If you were to describe the the thing that you're watching it from, then you can either describe it as it being in color, like for example, I'm sitting in front of my black laptop, or you can describe it in size, right? I'm sitting in front of the big TV, or I'm sitting in front of the small TV. Or if you're sitting on the couch, for example, then you can maybe say, I'm sitting on the red couch, or I'm sitting on the blue couch, or I'm sitting on the black couch, right? So you're basically telling us more about the couch, but you're describing it as in color, right? So when you, for example, within adjectives, right? If adjectives tells us what kind, then you can either describe that thing as in saying maybe what color it is, what size it is, if it's tall, if it's short, if it's big, if it's small, if it's soft, or if it's hard, for example. For example, if we look at this ball, right? If we look at this ball, Tulasi, how would you describe this ball? Look at the shape of the ball and look at the size of the ball. So Tom sees a truck, but now describe that truck. How would you describe the truck? So Tom sees a truck, but now we need to describe that truck. But do we say it is describe the truck as in is it a big truck or is it a small truck? And yes, it is a thing, right? So we would describe something as either it being big or small, it being hard. Like, for example, if we look at this ball, we can say we have a red ball, or we can say we have a small ball. We have a round ball. So that is how we describe the ball. If we describe the truck, then we can say Tom sees a big truck, right? With a red canopy. Then red and big is our adjectives. All right, let's go to our test. All right, we need to find the red book. We need to find the red book. So find the red book. We're now describing the book. Which book is it? First book or the second book? Yes, we have a red ball, so which means that red describes the ball as in color. So find the red book. So basically, the second book, right? But now, if we look at the sentence, what is the adjective within that sentence? What is the adjective within that sentence that tells us about the book, that describes the book? How are we describing the book? We are describing it in color. So, what is the adjective within that sentence? So, the adjective within the sentence is red, right? Because it tells us about the book, or just it tells us about the book. It tells us what kind of book. It's a red book. And the second one is correct. You need to find the short bookcase. The short bookcase. Is it the first option or the second option? So we need to find the short bookcase. And if we were to identify or find the short bookcase, we'll find it is the first one, right? So basically, if we are describing this bookcase, we would say it is short, right? So short is our adjective, just like the previous, the book. Red was our adjectives. So well done, guys. So the first one is correct, and our adjective is short because it describes or tells us about the bookcase. It tells us what kind of bookcase. We need to find the flat land. The flat land. Which one is the flat land? Is it the first option or the second option? A flat land. There's no hills, there's no mountains. And if we look at the sentence, right, find the flat land, what is our adjective? What word is our adjective within that sentence? All right, so the second one is it describes the land, right? And flat is our adjective that describes that describes the land because it's a flat land. All right. So now we're going to use number words. And when it comes to number words, right? Remember I said an adjective, it tells you either what kind or it tells you how many, right? So how many, it can be either described as in numbers. You don't even have to give a specific number. You can say maybe say things like several, some, many, a lot. That will basically describe something also and tells us how many. So if we look at this, right, how many baskets do you see? So how many baskets do you see within this picture? So how many baskets do you see? Yeah, we have a basket. So we need to say how many baskets you see in front of you. And if we were to say how many baskets there are, then we would say there's only one basket, right? So you can either write it one, or like as in the whole word one basket, or you can say number one basket, because that tells us how many baskets there are. So I said earlier on that an adjective, they also tell us how many, right? So over here, it's like describing the basket by telling us how many baskets you see. That's only one basket. And we say it once again that an adjective, it's a word that tells us about a person, an animal, a place, or a thing. And in this case, some adjectives, they tell us how many. How many. Like if we look at these trees, how many trees do you see over here? And how many puppies do you see? So how many trees do you see, as well as how many puppies do you see? So how many trees are there and how many puppies are there? Because we now need to basically identify or say how many, because we have adjectives that tell us what kind, but also like in this case, we have adjectives that tells us how many. And when they tell us how many, it is basically in number. And here it says Kim sees trees. How many trees does Kim see? So Kim sees two trees, right? So Kim sees two trees. So which means that our adjective within the sentence that tells us how many is two, because that is the amount of trees that we see. Yes. So two trees, because that is the amount of trees. That is how many trees we see. And then I have three dogs. I have three dogs. How are they describing the dogs in number? How many dogs do they have? So we are then saying I have three dogs, which means that our adjective is three because they're telling us how many dogs there are, right? Now let's go to our test. Okay, if we look at this picture, how many airplanes are there? How many airplanes are there? So how many airplanes do you see over here? Do we see two or do we see one? All right. And if we were to identify how many airplanes there are, we would say there's two airplanes. So, for example, saying, I see two airplanes, which means that the word two is an adjective that tells us how many airplanes there are. So, two is correct. So, well done. Two is correct. How many dishes or plates are there? How many dishes are there? Or we can say how many plates are there? So how many do you see? So how many plates or dishes are there? Do we see 5 plates or do we see 10 plates? All right, so we can say there are 5 plates, right? And there's 5 specifically because we can even count it in number. And how many bags were there? Yeah, we see 1, 2, 3 bags, right? So we see 3 bags. All right. So that is basically now the end of our lesson on adjectives, right? And we see that an adjective, it tells us more about a noun or pronoun. Adjectives, they tell us more about people, places, animals, or things, right? And also we have identified today adjectives that tells us what kind. And remember that can be described as in size or color, as in weight, height, right? If it's hard or if it's soft, right? And then we also have adjectives that told us how many, right? And they can basically be described as in number to tell us how many of that thing is there. All right, so this is now the end of our lesson on adjectives. Thank you very much, guys, for joining our class. I really hope you're going to have a good day further. Goodbye.